Is Donald Trump totalitarian? To some people, it is absurd, offensive, or even ridiculous. Trump is an elected American president.
And we will make America great again.
He has supporters, opponents, courts, elections, journalists, judges, and a constitution around him. But to others, the question itself is the warning. Because the argument is not that America has become Stalin's Soviet Union, it is not that Trump is Hitler, and it is not that history is repeating itself scene by scene. The argument is more unsettling than that. Some historians and political theorists say the danger begins with a leader who says only he can save the nation, a movement that treats opposition as betrayal, a public that no longer agrees on what is real.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
It's all fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news, though. Very fake news.
And a politics that slowly stops sounding like politics at all. So the real question may not be, is Trump Stalin, Hitler, or Mussolini? The question is, why do those names keep coming up?
We will make America strong again.
The word totalitarian is often used as an insult, but Hannah Arendt, the famous political thinker who helped define how we understand totalitarianism, used the word in a much more precise way. For Arendt, totalitarianism was not just a dictatorship. It was not simply one man with too much power. It was a system that tries to control not only what people do, but how they understand reality itself. Arendt studied the regimes of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. She argued that totalitarian movements are built from two central forces: ideology and terror. Ideology gives the movement a complete explanation of the world. Terror forces reality to fit that explanation. The Library of Congress summarizes this tradition by describing totalitarianism as a form of rule that uses mass propaganda, ideology, terror, and mass support to reconstruct society itself. In Hitler's Germany, the central myth was race.
Ich will heute wieder ein Prophet sein. Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
History became a biological struggle. Enemies were not merely wrong. They were portrayed as parasites, contaminants, threats to the body of the nation. In Stalin's Soviet Union, the central myth was class. History became an inevitable march toward communism. Enemies were not just political opponents. They became wreckers, saboteurs, traitors, enemies of the people. And in Mussolini's Italy, the state itself became sacred. In the doctrine of fascism, Mussolini's system described the fascist state as all-embracing, with no human or spiritual value outside it, and explicitly called fascism totalitarian. But now comes the controversy. Some critics argue that parts of Trump's politics echo pieces of this older pattern. Not whole systems, but pieces or signals. And the question is whether those fragments are just normal political exaggeration, or whether they are warnings.
Are you a dictator on day one?
No.
In 2016, Donald Trump gave one of the simplest authoritarian-sounding lines in modern American politics.
I alone can fix it.
To supporters, it sounded like confidence, a businessman promising to break a broken system. To critics, it sounded like something older. Authoritarian politics often begins with a promise of rescue. The leader does not simply offer policies, he offers himself. The analysis of regime change describes a shift between Trump's first term and his later presidency. In the first term, some aides reportedly acted like guardrails. They resisted him, leaked against him, and tried to stop his most dangerous impulses.
I got used up, essentially, in the service of Donald Trump. I was at peace with that. And I was not going to try to keep my job by telling the president what he wanted to hear.
Kelly confirms long-standing allegations that Trump called prisoners of war suckers.
Kelly also called his former boss, quote, a person who admires autocrats and murderous dictators.
Kelly ends his statement with an ominous prayer. God help us if Trump wins.
But in the later version, the inner circle is described as far more loyal, even mystical in its belief that Trump has a kind of personal destiny. That matters in an Arendtian sense, because authoritarian movements do not only depend on fear, they also depend on surrendering judgment. The leader's instincts become strategy. His survival becomes proof. His power becomes personal. Every totalizing movement needs an enemy, not just a rival, not just an opposition party. An enemy. For Arendt, this mattered deeply. Totalitarian movements do not only win by persuading people, they win by organizing fear.
A race of parasites.
The enemy explains everything: why the nation is weak, why people are suffering, why the leader is attacked, why normal rules must be broken. In Stalin's Soviet Union, enemies were everywhere: saboteurs, spies, Trotskyists, class enemies. In Nazi Germany, the enemy was racialized and dehumanized, with Jews and other targeted groups cast as existential threats. In fascist Italy, opponents could be portrayed as anti-national forces standing against the unity of the state. This is where Trump's critics point to one of his most controversial lines. At a Veterans Day rally in New Hampshire in 2023, Trump pledged to root out what he called communists, Marxists, fascists, and radical left thugs who live like vermin within the country.
We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections. The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
ABC News reported that historians and critics compared the language to past dictators, while Trump's campaign rejected the comparison.
He has the same personality as scary, the exact same personality as all the other people I studied, like bad dictators.
That phrase, vermin, became explosive, because dehumanizing language has a history. But we have to be careful. Using a word does not make a country Nazi Germany. A campaign speech is not the same as a genocide. And political insults, even ugly ones, are not automatically totalitarianism. But historians ask a different question, not, are these things identical? But, why does the language move in that direction? Why describe opponents not just as wrong, but dangerous, as something to be rooted out? That is the open loop. And it gets darker when paired with another phrase.
Than the threat from within.
In 2024, Trump described domestic opponents as a greater danger than foreign adversaries, and suggested that, if necessary, the National Guard or military could handle radical left lunatics. Reporting from AP and other outlets described this as alarming to critics and authoritarian in tone. Supporters said he was talking about disorder, crime, and national security. Critics heard something else. A president or future president speaking about domestic political enemies in the language of internal war. For Hannah Arendt, one of the most frightening parts of totalitarianism was not only violence, it was the destruction of shared reality. The ideal subject, in Arendt's famous formulation, is not simply a convinced believer. It is someone for whom the difference between fact and fiction has become unstable. That idea is why many scholars connect Arendt to the modern post-truth problem.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
It's all fake news.
A democracy can survive disagreement. It cannot easily survive a world where millions of people no longer trust courts, elections, journalists, science, civil servants, or any neutral process outside the leader's movement. The regime change analysis describes this as a kind of reality distortion field. Not just lying, not just propaganda, but flooding the public space with claims, distractions, accusations, and counter-narratives until truth itself becomes hard to use. Every fact becomes disputed. Every institution becomes suspect. Every investigation becomes political. And that is why Arendt still matters here. Her fear was not only that people would believe lies, it was that they would lose the ability to tell reality from fiction. This is where January 6th enters the story. After the 2020 election, Trump repeatedly claimed the election was stolen.
That is a big get.
This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal.
Courts did not overturn the result. State officials certified the results. Congress met to count the electoral votes. Then, on January 6, 2021, a mob of Trump supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol as Congress was certifying Joe Biden's victory. The official House January 6 committee report was released in December 2022 and remains available through GovInfo with supporting materials. For some historians, this was the turning point. Robert Paxton, one of the best-known historians of fascism, had previously resisted calling Trump a fascist. After January 6th, he wrote that Trump's encouragement of civic violence to overturn an election crossed a red line, making the label seem necessary to him. That does not settle the debate. Other experts disagree. Some argue that Trump shows authoritarian or fascist tendencies, but does not fit the classic definition of fascism. AP's overview of the debate notes that experts are divided. Some see fascist traits, while others stress that classic fascism involved one-party rule, suppression of opposition newspapers, and systematic jailing of opponents, conditions not equivalent to the US political system. And this is the tension at the center of the whole question. Trump's critics point to the attack on reality. Trump's defenders point to the survival of institutions. Both facts matter. The election was challenged.
Today I will lay out just some of the evidence proving that we won this election, and we won it by a landslide.
But the transfer of power happened. The Capitol was attacked, but Congress returned and certified the result. Trump pressured the system, but the system did not fully break. So what do we call a leader who strains democratic institutions but does not abolish them? Is that totalitarianism? Then came the line that almost sounded too perfect for his critics. In December 2023, Sean Hannity asked Trump whether he would abuse power or act as a dictator if returned to office. Trump answered that he would not, except for day one.
He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, no, other than day one. We're closing the border, and we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
AP reported the exchange and noted that Trump's aides framed the comment as a way to provoke media outrage and focus attention on immigration and energy. To supporters, it was a joke, a classic Trump provocation, a media trap.
We have real dictators in the Middle East, okay? And in Russia, we don't have.
To critics, the joke was the point, because authoritarian politics often works through ambiguity. The leader says something extreme. The crowd laughs. The media reacts. The supporters say he was joking. The critics say he meant it. And the boundary moves. This is one of the strangest features of modern strongman politics. The leader can speak seriously and unseriously at the same time. He can threaten and deny the threat. He can say the forbidden thing, then call the reaction hysterical. He can test how much the public will tolerate. Ruth Ben-Gia, a historian of authoritarian leaders, has argued that modern strongmen often work inside democratic systems while bending them toward personal loyalty and undemocratic control, rather than copying 1930s fascism exactly.
And this is why Trump has been ruling by executive order. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about Congress. They don't have patience for laws, for norms, for compliance, for anything that's going to stop their will from doing what it wants to do. And unfortunately, when you have been able to domesticate your party and that part of Congress into turning a party into your handmaiden, your personal vehicle.
That distinction matters, because Trump does not need to be identical to Mussolini for the comparison to create debate. The controversial claim is not that Trump rebuilt fascist Italy in America. The claim is that some of the emotional machinery looks familiar. The crowd, the grievance, the leader as victim.
Conspired against me in order to fight like hell to make sure I lose the election. As a continuation of the greatest witch hunt of all time.
The leader as savior. The enemy within. The attack on neutral institutions. The joke that may not only be a joke. The regime change analysis also argues that the real danger is structural. It points to an aggressive use of presidential power, emergency declarations, and legal pressure to bypass ordinary democratic process. A fentanyl emergency, a border emergency, a refugee emergency, each creates the same frame. Normal politics is too slow. The crisis is too serious. The executive must act. That does not make every emergency power totalitarian. However, Older authoritarian movements often rose by saying the law was not enough. The nation was in danger, the enemy was inside. Only extraordinary power could save it. But if we only compare similarities, we can make almost anything look like anything. So what does not fit? Trump has not created a one-party state. He has not abolished elections. He has not built a total ideology equivalent to Stalinist class war or Nazi racial theory. He has not created a state terror system on the scale that Arendt was analyzing. The United States still has rival parties, independent courts, state governments, opposition media, civil society, elections, a constitutional structure that dictators historically try to destroy. This is why many scholars prefer words like authoritarian, illiberal, or populist, rather than simply totalitarian. Because totalitarianism, in Arendt's sense, is not just harsh rhetoric. It is a complete attempt to dominate society and reality. So the title question, is Trump totalitarian, may be too simple. But maybe that is why it is useful. Because can democratic societies recognize dangerous patterns before they become complete systems?